The tray hit the floor before I even saw who threw it. My lunch, gone, scattered across the commissary deck in a spray of reconstituted protein and something that had been trying very hard to pass as soup. I stood there holding nothing, my hand still in the shape of a tray that no longer existed, and the whole commissary went quiet for exactly 1 second before everyone went back to eating like nothing had happened. That was my 3rd day on Veth Station. My name is Maya Reeves. I am 24 years old. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where the biggest weekly event was whether the diner would run out of pie on Sunday. I have a degree in xenobiology, a contractor badge that still had my photo slightly off-center, and a thermos with a dent in the left side that I carried everywhere and never drank from. I had chosen this posting. That part is important. Nobody sent me here. Nobody assigned me to the farthest research station from Earth in the entire Veth corridor. I filled out the transfer papers myself at 2 in the morning in the kind of silence that only exists after something breaks that cannot be fixed. The papers asked for a reason. I wrote career opportunity, the blank space where the real reason should have been stayed blank. Veth Station was not pretty. It was not the kind of space station that appeared in travel brochures or the backgrounds of diplomatic news feeds. It was a working station, all function and no apology, built into the underside of an asteroid that the Veth Consortium had hollowed out over 60 years ago, and filled with docking bays, research labs, commissaries, and the kind of recycled air that had been breathed by too many species for too long. It smelled like a combination of industrial coolant, something organic that nobody had fully identified, and old metal. The lighting in the residential corridor flickered every 3rd step for reasons maintenance had been ignoring for at least a decade. I loved it, in the way that people love things that ask nothing of them except to show up. The xenobiology research post where I worked was on level 7, 8 researchers total. I was the only human. The others were 2 Velhari, a Drenathi pair who communicated primarily through color shifts in their skin, a Gorathi observer who said approximately 12 words per day and seemed to find that excessive, and Dr. Yen, who was Korathi and who had, in my first 2 days, been the only person on the entire station to show me where the supply cabinet was and explain how the sample processors worked without making me feel like a nuisance. That was worth noting. Most Korathi I had encountered on the station had a way of looking at humans that sat somewhere between mild curiosity and the kind of tolerance people extend to something small that has wandered into a space it was not designed for. The Korathi were large, not tall the way basketball players are tall, but large the way a wall is large, the way something load-bearing is large. They averaged around 7 feet, broad through the chest and shoulders, with bioluminescent markings along their neck and upper arms that shifted color with their mood. Their faces were angular, their eyes a solid reflective amber, and they moved through spaces like they owned them, which on Veth Station in practical terms most of them did. The Korathi Enforcement Syndicate held 3 of the 5 primary docking contracts. They were the single largest non-Veth population on the station. Humans were not even in the top 5. I was aware of this. I had been aware of it before I arrived, had read the demographics in the transfer briefing, had noted it and filed it in the part of my brain that stores things I cannot change and therefore do not spend energy on. I was a contractor. I was here to catalog microorganism samples from asteroid core extracts and write comparative analyses that would eventually be read by about 11 people. I was not here to make a statement. I was not here to represent anything. I just wanted to do my work. I retrieved my ID badge from where it had skidded under a bench on the docking level on my first day. A Korathi dockworker had shouldered me into a wall without slowing down, without looking back, without registering that anything had happened at all. The badge went left. I went right. I picked it up, clipped it back onto my jacket and kept walking. I did not say anything. I had already done that math. I knew what the numbers came out to. By day 3 I had a routine. Lab at 7th hour, sample processing through mid-shift, commissary for the meal break, back to the lab, residential corridor by late evening. Simple, repeatable, the kind of routine that keeps a person level when everything around them is new and slightly hostile and smells like a chemical reaction that has yet to finish. The commissary on level 4 was the largest on the station. Long tables, bench seating, a serving line that ran along the far wall and dispensed food in the specific order of whoever had negotiated the catering contract most recently. It was loud in the way that spaces are loud when many different species with many different vocal registers all occupy them at once, a layered noise that I had learned in 3 days to tune out like a fan running in the background. I collected my tray. I found a seat at the near end of a bench that was mostly empty. I set down my thermos, which I had not opened, and I began to eat. I was 4 bites in when the tray went. I looked up. He was Korathi, not Dr. Yen, not anyone from research or administration or any of the categories where I had begun to build a small, functional map of who to expect. He was enforcement crew. I knew that from the syndicate markings on his collar, and he was looking at me the way people look at something they are about to move regardless of whether it wants to be moved. His name, I would learn later, was Grexval. At that moment, he was just 7 feet of bioluminescent certainty standing on the other side of a tray that used to have my lunch on it. "This table," he said, in Standard, which was the common language of the station, spoken with the flat inflection of someone who has never needed to make their requests sound like requests. "I use this table." I looked at the tray on the floor. I looked at the commissary around us, which had gone that 1 second quiet again before resuming its noise like a river going around a stone. I picked up my thermos. I looked at the dent on its left side. Then I looked back at him. "There are 12 other tables," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he sat down, not at the table, at my table, right across from where I had been sitting, settling into the bench with the ease of someone who has never once in their life experienced the consequences of being inconvenient to others. I stood there. I had 4 bites of food still in my stomach, and a shift that had 4 more hours in it. I picked up my tray from the floor. I walked to the serving line. I requested another meal. The serving unit dispensed it without comment because serving units are the most honest entities on any station. I took my tray to a different table, near the window that looked out onto the docking lane, and I sat down. I did not say anything else. The thermos sat on the table in front of me. The dent caught the light in a specific way at this angle, which I had not noticed before. I cataloged it while I ate. I was aware, in the back of my mind, in the quiet place where I stored the things I did not say out loud, that I had just let something happen that I should not have let happen. But the math was what it was. And I had done it before. And I had learned, a long time ago, in a conversation that I was not ready to think about yet, that sometimes you do the math and you come up short, and you just carry the thermos and you keep going. That was day 3. By day 5, I had stopped thinking about it. That was a mistake. The thing about Grexval was that he was not angry. Angry would have been something I understood. Angry has a reason behind it, a wound or a fear or a history that makes it make sense even when it is wrong. Grexval was not angry. He was entertained. That was worse. I had been on Veth Station for 9 days when it happened in full. 9 days of routine. 9 days of lab work and sample logs and learning which corridors the maintenance crews had not gotten around to repairing, and which commissary shift had the shortest line. 9 days of being the only human in every room I walked into, which I had expected, and which I had prepared for, and which was, genuinely, fine. I was not fragile about being small in a large space. I had been small in large spaces my whole life. I was good at it. I was in the commissary at the regular mid-shift meal break, same table near the window, my tray, my thermos, my usual meal. Two Velhari researchers from a different department were at the far end of the same bench, not talking to me, which was fine. A Gorathi engineer was eating alone near the door. The commissary was at about half capacity, the noise at its usual layered hum. Grexval came in with two others. I noticed them because the room noticed them first, not in any dramatic way, not a hush or a stir, just a small collective readjustment, the kind that happens when something that has weight and authority enters a space. The conversations around me did not stop. They just shifted, the way plants shift toward light, except in reverse. I kept eating. He saw me at the window table before he reached the serving line. I know this because he changed direction before he got there. That was when I understood that this was not about the table. He stopped across from me. His two companions stopped behind him, arranged in that loose, casual way that means they were not there by accident. "The human girl," he said, in standard, loud enough to carry. I looked up from my tray. "Still here," I said. The Velhari at the far end of the bench went quiet. I registered it in my peripheral vision, that specific stillness of people who have decided that not being noticed is currently the best strategy. "I heard humans are assigned to the research post now," Grexval said. He was not talking to me exactly. He was talking in my direction while addressing the commissary. "I wonder what they study, how to take up space in rooms they were not built for." One of his companions made a sound that was the Korathi equivalent of a chuckle, low and resonant. I set my fork down. "Xenobiology," I said, "specifically asteroid core microorganism cataloging. The current project is comparative analysis of anaerobic organism colonies across 3 different asteroid types in the Veth Belt. The work will take approximately 14 months and will contribute to a larger survey being coordinated by the Veth Consortium's Environmental Division." He blinked. "That was not a real question," he said. "I know," I said. "I answered it anyway." He leaned forward slightly, his bioluminescent markings shifting toward a cooler color, something in the blue-green range, which in Korathi physiology I had learned from Dr. Yen's casual comments indicated something between amusement and contempt. It was a specific combination that only existed in Korathi, because most species kept those two feelings further apart. "You are very small," he said. "Your species is very small, soft, short-lived. You have been traveling in space for what, 200 years? The Korathi have held contracts in this corridor for 900. This station existed before your species had the technology to leave your solar system." "I know," I said again. "And yet here you are," he said, "in our commissary, at a table near our docking bay, doing small work in a small laboratory on a station that does not need you." The commissary had gotten quieter, not silent. The hum was still there, but lower, the way music gets quieter when something is happening that people want to hear without appearing to listen. I looked at my tray. The soup had gone lukewarm. The protein portion was still fine. I had approximately 22 minutes left in my meal break. "Are you finished?" I said. "No," he said. And he reached over and picked up my thermos. He did not do anything with it. He just held it, turning it over in one large hand, examining it with the specific carelessness of someone demonstrating that they can. That was when something in my chest went very still. Not anger, not yet. Something older and quieter than anger, the feeling that lives underneath it when a person has carried a thing for a long time through a lot of difficult spaces, and suddenly someone who does not know what the thing means is holding it like it is nothing. "Old," he said, looking at the dent. "Damaged like it has been dropped many times." He looked at me. "Appropriate, I think." I stood up. I was aware that I was 5 feet 4 inches tall, and that he was 7 feet of enforcement crew, and that we were in a commissary full of people who had just made themselves very busy looking at their food. I was aware of all of this in the same flat, informational way that I was aware of the thermos in his hand, and the soup going cold on my tray, and the 21 minutes I had left before I needed to be back in the lab. I was also aware, in the very back of my mind, in the place I had been keeping something sealed for 9 days, that I had not yet contacted my brother. I reached out and I took the thermos from his hand. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just took it back the way you take back a thing that belongs to you when someone is holding it and should not be. He let me. That surprised me, but I understood it a second later when I saw the look on his face. He let me because taking it back had not changed anything. I had still stood in the middle of a crowded commissary and been made small in front of 40 different species, and walking away with my thermos did not undo that. It just meant I left. So I left. I walked back to the lab. I logged 4 hours of sample analysis. I wrote 3 paragraphs of comparative notes on colony density variance in silicate versus iron composite cores. I did all of it at exactly the pace I always did it at, with exactly the same level of attention, because falling apart in the middle of a work shift helps no one, and I had never been the kind of person who fell apart in the middle of work shifts. At the end of the shift, I went to my residential quarters. I sat on the bunk. I put the thermos on the small shelf next to the bunk where it always sat. I looked at the dent on its left side for a long time. Then I opened my contact interface. I found the name I had not opened in 14 months. I started writing a message. I deleted it. I started again. I deleted it again. I wrote it a third time. This version was 6 words. I did not revise it. I sent it before I could think about it too carefully, because the last time I had thought too carefully about contacting my brother, I had spent 4 hours thinking and sent nothing and gone to sleep with the interface still open. I closed the interface. I lay down on the bunk and looked at the ceiling. It had a scratch in the paint above the second ventilation panel that looked like a river delta. I had noticed it on my first night. I had been noticing it every night since. It was a very consistent ceiling. I appreciated that. I did not sleep for a while, but eventually I did. And in the morning I went back to work. Because that was the thing about math you cannot change. You do not stop moving because the numbers came out wrong. You carry the thermos. You go to the lab. You do the work. You wait. I was in the middle of processing sample batch 14 when the station went quiet. Not the commissary quiet. Not the 1-second quiet that happened when something minor disrupted the local social order and then everyone recovered and moved on. This was a different quiet. A station-wide quiet. The kind that moves through walls. I noticed it first in the ventilation sound. The hum that ran beneath everything on Veth Station, the constant background breath of the air recyclers and the data conduits and the docking bay pressure systems, shifted. Not off. Still running. But different in the same way a voice is different when the person speaking it is trying very hard to stay level. Dr. Yen looked up from her workstation. Her bioluminescent markings had gone a pale, steady amber, which I had learned meant careful attention. I kept my hands on the sample tray and watched her watch the door. "Something is docking," said one of the Velhari researcher Oren, without looking up from his display. He had a habit of stating obvious things in the tone of someone nodding weather conditions. Mild, informational, a small professional distance from whatever was happening. "Unscheduled," said the second Velhari T, who was pulling something up on his interface. His feeding crest, the ridged cartilage structure above his brow line that Velhari used for thermoregulation, and I had come to understand, emotional signaling had flattened slightly. No advance filing, no manifest preclearance. "That is not how docking works," I said, because it was not. Veth Station had a 7-tier filing protocol for incoming vessels. Unscheduled docking requests were rejected at the corridor perimeter. It was simply how it worked. "No," T agreed, "it is not." I looked at the thermos on my workstation. I had received a reply to my 6-word message 11 minutes after I sent it. The reply had also been short. I had read it twice and then set my interface face down on the shelf next to the bunk and gone to sleep. I had not told anyone what I sent or what I received. I was aware, sitting in this lab with sample batch 14 half-processed, that I did not need to. The Gorathi observer, who said approximately 12 words per day, looked up from his corner of the lab and said 4 of his daily allocation. 7th Fleet, he said. Docking Corridor 3. No one said anything else for a moment. Dr. Yen turned slowly in her chair and looked at me. I was looking at the thermos. The dent on the left side. The way the lab lighting caught it at this specific angle, which was different from the commissary lighting and different from my residential quarter lighting. Every light source made it look slightly different. It was still the same dent. Maya, Dr. Yin said. Her voice was careful, not the careful of suspicion. The careful of someone who has put something together and is moving very slowly around what they have assembled. Batch 14, I said. I need about another 40 minutes to finish the colony density count on the silicate samples. She said nothing. I can do the iron composite batch first if the silicate analysis needs the processor to cool, I said. Either works. I had planned to complete both before end of shift. Maya, she said again. I looked at her. Her markings had shifted. Still amber, but warmer now, with a thin thread of something paler at the edges. In Korathi physiology, that combination did not have a single clean translation. The closest I had found in my research was the word that described the feeling of watching something arrive that you had been half expecting for a long time. Is there something you want to tell me? She said. I thought about it. No, I said. Is there something I should know? I picked up the thermos. I turned it over in my hands once, the way I sometimes did without really thinking about it, the way a person handles something they have carried so long it has become part of the shape of their hands. 7th Fleet unscheduled docking, I said. In a corridor that does not accept unscheduled docking, means that whoever is on that vessel did not ask for clearance because they did not need to ask for clearance. She waited. That is a very short list of people, I said. I set the thermos back down. I am going to finish batch 14, I said. If anyone needs me before end of shift, I will be here. She turned back to her workstation. The other researchers had gone very still, with the concentrated focus of people who are doing their work extremely carefully, because that is what they do when something is happening around them that they do not fully understand and cannot control. I pulled up the colony density analysis. I did not look at the door. I had said what I needed to say to my brother in 6 words. He had replied in fewer. The distance between us, the 14 months of it, and the thing that lived inside those months that I was not ready to name yet, was still exactly what it had been before I sent the message. But he was here. He was 3 docking bays away and closing, on a vessel that had moved through a 7-tier clearance protocol without filing a single form, because Eli Reeves did not file forms. Eli Reeves was the kind of person the forms were written around. I had known him since he was 10 years old and I was 7, and he had stood between me and something bigger than both of us. Not because he had been told to, not because anyone had asked, but because that was simply the architecture of who he was. And then he had grown up and kept doing exactly that, only at greater scale. And now the thing standing between him and opposition was not size or stubbornness, but 17 years of the most specific kind of experience the galaxy could produce, and a rank that other species said in other rooms after checking who was listening. I had not spoken to him in 14 months because of the last good conversation we had, which had not been good. I had left. He had let me. I had chosen the farthest posting I could find. He had not stopped me. But I had sent 6 words. And he had come. 53 minutes later, While I was writing up the final notes on the silicate colony analysis, and researcher Oren was trying very hard to look like he was not watching the door, my brother walked into the lab. He was in uniform. He was always in uniform when he was working, and Eli was always working. He was 2 years older than me and looked at the way that people look their age when their age has been earned rather than accumulated. He was not remarkably large. He was not physically imposing in the way that Grexval was physically imposing. He took up space differently, quietly, the way certain things take up space not through size, but through a quality that does not have a simple word. He stopped inside the door. I did not look up immediately. I finished the sentence I was writing. It was a complete sentence and it needed to be finished. Then I looked up. He looked at me. I looked at him. The lab was absolutely silent in a way it had not been since I arrived. Even the Gorathi observer, who had turned in his chair and was looking at Eli with the expression of someone who has performed a calculation they did not expect to perform today. Then Eli looked at the shelf beside my workstation. At the thermos. His jaw did something, not a large movement, a very small one, the kind that is visible only if you have been reading a face for a long time. "You still have that thing," he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at it for a moment longer, then he looked back at me. "Show me where your samples are stored," he said. It was not a question, but it was not an order either. It was the voice of someone who is standing in a room with a person they have not seen in 14 months and need something to do with their hands. I stood up. I showed him the sample storage unit. We did not talk about anything that mattered for 47 minutes. We talked about sample integrity protocols and asteroid core composition, and the specific challenges of cataloging anaerobic organisms in low-gravity extraction conditions. The researchers around us were so thoroughly absorbed in their work that not one of them made a single sound. I was aware, at some point during those 47 minutes, that something had happened in the commissary while I was in the lab. I did not know the details yet. I would learn them later in pieces, from the kind of second-hand information that moves through a station like water through old pipes. Grexval had been escorted from Veth Station 61 minutes after 7th Fleet docked. The escort had involved 2 of Eli's crew and a formal notification to the Korathi Enforcement Syndicate regarding conduct violations under the Veth Station Non-Aggression Compact, a compact that the Syndicate had signed 40 years ago and had not had invoked against them in the last 20, because invoking it required standing that most visitors did not possess. 7th Fleet possessed it. The word escorted was doing a significant amount of work in that sentence. I did not ask Eli about it directly. I knew he would not have led with it. He never led with that kind of thing. He did not perform. He simply acted and then filed the appropriate documentation and then continued. What I asked him at the end of those 47 minutes, when the sample logs were updated and the other researchers had remembered how to breathe, was the other thing. "You still have yours," I said. He did not ask what I meant. He reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket, and he set it on the workstation next to mine. A thermos, same model, different dent, same position on the left side. We stood there for a moment. 14 months, I said. "Yes," he said. "That was a long time." "Yes," he said again. "I am not apologizing," I said, "because I am not sorry for leaving. I am sorry for the part that made leaving feel necessary." He was quiet for a moment. "I know the difference," he said. That was the whole conversation. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, no speech that wrapped up 14 months of silence in a neat resolution. We were not those kinds of people. We had never been those kinds of people. We were the kind of people who carried thermoses they never drank from and answered 6-word messages with fewer words and crossed star systems without filing advance notice because the situation required it. He stayed for 3 more hours. We ate in the commissary at the table by the window. No one sat near us. No one walked past us without looking somewhere else first. A Velhari from the engineering level came in mid-meal and saw Eli and turned around and left with the specific efficiency of someone who has reevaluated their hunger. We talked about small things. Ohio, the diner that had finally closed 2 years ago. Whether the asteroid core samples I was finding would have any practical industrial applications. The way the ventilation hum on Veth Station was slightly lower frequency than the standard consortium model, which Eli had noticed in the first 10 minutes. Before he left, he stood in the doorway of my residential quarters and looked at the thermos on the shelf. "Drink from it sometime," he said. "Maybe," I said. He left. I listened to the sound of the station around me, the hum of the recyclers, the distant pulse of the docking bays, the flicker of the light in the corridor outside my door every third step, for reasons maintenance was still ignoring. I picked up the thermos. I looked at the dent on the left side. The way the residential light caught it was different from the lab light, and different from the commissary light, and different from every other light I had looked at it under. And it was still the same dent, still the same shape, still the same small, permanent record of a moment when something hit hard enough to leave a mark but not hard enough to break anything. I opened it. The tea inside was cold, 14 months past any reasonable temperature for drinking. I had made it the night before I left and sealed it and carried it every day since without opening it, because opening it meant something I had not been ready for. I drank it anyway. It tasted like cold tea. It tasted like something that had been waiting a long time. 3 days later, researcher T filed a personal xenosociology observation in his department log. I did not read it at the time. I read it later, months afterward, when the Veth Consortium published a collection of cross-species behavioral studies from station researchers across the corridor. His entry was brief. He wrote that he had updated his threat assessment model for humans. The previous model, he wrote, had focused on physical capability, technological development, and institutional military structure. These were measurable. They produced predictable outputs. The previous model, he wrote, had not accounted for a variable that was difficult to quantify. He described watching a 7th Fleet commander arrive unannounced at a station that did not accept unannounced arrivals, in response to an event that most species would have documented and escalated through proper channels over a period of weeks. The commander, T wrote, had arrived the same day. He had not explained this. He had not referred to it. He had simply arrived, resolved the situation through mechanisms that were technically within existing compact frameworks but had not been invoked in 2 decades, and then spent 3 hours discussing asteroid core composition with his sister. The variable the previous model had not accounted for, researcher T wrote, was the following. Humans, when they love someone, do not recalibrate the threat. They do not file an assessment. They do not wait for the proper procedure or the appropriate window or the moment when intervention is strategically optimal. They come. That, he noted, was the part that required a new model. The old one was no longer sufficient.